Okay, I'm gonna start this video with a fun fact. It's been just over 6 months since we looked at the Zephyrus G14 from ROG, and 10 months since AMD announced the Ryzen 4000H series CPUs. Time just flies. It's been over 10 months, guys. And over the course of that 10-month period, we've taken a look at a variety of Ryzen gaming laptops. Some had great ideas, like the Dell G515 SC that came with smart shift technology, and then there were others like the MSI Bravo 15, which was pretty good for its price, but it was all right. It had some other issues as well. And then there was the Tough A15, which had great specs. Other than the G14, all these notebooks seem to give great first impressions, but then it sort of missed the final landing for a number of other reasons. So we went back to the comment section and we looked at what you guys wanted us to check out, and we came across this. No, it's not the HP Omen 15. I hope that's on its way, but this is the RP-15 from a Delaware-based company called Eluktronics. Eluktronics. I hope I said that right. Eluktronics. And I'll be honest with you guys. This thing pretty much blows all of the other AMD Ryzen-based notebooks straight out of the water. So let's talk about this a little bit more in depth right after this.
The new Corsair iQ4000X is the mid-tower you'll appreciate, with beautiful lighting powered by iQ Lighting Node Core and new AirGuide 120mm fans for powerful concentrated airflow. The frame is high quality and a pleasure to work with. It's available in black or white and Airflow Model 2. Check it out below.
So normally I'd get into specs right away, but in this case, I do want to kick things off with a little bit of a discussion about Eluktronics. You see, they're one of the small companies that are trying to bridge the gap between high-end boutique laptop manufacturers and the big boys like Dell, HP, MSI, and ASUS. On one hand, that's great news for anyone who wants something a little bit more customized, but there are some drawbacks too. Like, you're not going to find their devices across the world, and if you add international shipping fees, they're going to cost a lot more than locally available brands. Being on the smaller side also means there's sometimes long delays between orders and shipping, especially when a popular laptop like the RP-15 comes out. And on top of that, when you add shortages of AMD CPUs that we've been hearing from every manufacturer, both big and small, these are certainly certain things that you will need to take into consideration. So about those specs, our unit comes with a Ryzen 7 4800H, 16GB of 3200 MHz memory, a 512GB SSD, an RTX 2060, and a 144Hz IPS display. All of that comes to around $1,300 US or 1,800 Canadian. If you want to go all out, the RP-15 can be configured with 8 TB of SSD storage and 64 GB of RAM for close to $3,000. Now, unfortunately, you can't get a Ryzen 5 or a faster GPU. As for the laptop itself, this is an interesting one for sure. Eluktronics isn't trying to throw a bunch of marketing fluff like RGB or crazy designs at your face. This is a clean and simple design. Nothing more, nothing less. They also teamed up with D-Brand to include a black matrix skin on the top cover. You can choose to get it pre-applied or not. Unfortunately, our sample came with a few air bubbles. It's something that a blower dryer can fix, but I tried and it didn't work out, so I would highly recommend maybe getting it without it being pre-applied, so that way you can take your time to apply it. But other than that, it looks really nice. The chassis is a mix of aluminum and plastic materials, so don't expect this thing to be a premium unibody metal design. The hinge is okay, there is a little bit of wobble, and the display does flex a little bit. Again, you can't expect anything more from hard plastic materials, and for the price, I'll give it a pass. Now, in terms of size, this thing is 19.8mm thick and it weighs about 4.2 pounds, so it's fairly lightweight. It's definitely lighter than the Dell G515 SC and the Tough A15, so you can easily tuck this into a backpack, no problem. And honestly, I'm very surprised at how thin it is for an AMD laptop. Very impressive. The interior space is pretty clean. You get a full-size keyboard, which I'm sure some of you would appreciate. And right by the power button, there's also a mode switch button that shifts between office mode, gaming mode, and then beast mode. It's very easy to access, and it quickly allows the user to switch between different modes depending on the type of work that they're doing, which is nice. The trackpad is aligned perfectly. The keys themselves are awesome. There's excellent feedback, and the travel distance is perfect. But I think the spacing between the keys could have been tightened up a little bit, as I did have trouble reaching some keys. Maybe it's just a matter of time for me to get used to it, but I thought it was worth bringing up. The keys are backlit, and yes, that's the only RGB element that they've added to the RP-15. It's a single zone layer and it's bright enough for your night gaming sessions. The trackpad is fantastic. It's not a glass surface, but the materials that they've used here is very smooth and comfortable to use. It also comes with support for Windows precision drivers, and I gotta be honest, this is probably one of the best trackpads that I've looked at on an AMD-based gaming laptop at this price point. I think Eluktronics have definitely nailed it in that department. Also, the integrated primary left and right buttons are nice and tactile, so that's nice. So this is the webcam quality test on the RP-15. Now, as you can probably tell, I am looking straight down at the worst possible location. It's right by the hinge. It's actually not a nose cam, it's more of a hinge cam because it's literally touching the hinge, and you can kind of clearly tell, you can see my finger sort of crawling up to it. It's really not a feasible location, especially if you're using this for business meetings and things like that. But again, this is a gaming laptop in the first place, so, you know, do you really value a good quality webcam? Let me know in the comments down below. The speakers are bottom facing and they don't sound that great. In fact, it doesn't get loud enough. So if you're using this thing to watch movies with your friends or family, it's just not going to cut it. You might have to end up using external speakers or maybe even headphones if you want to game, which I think most of you would probably end up doing because it is a gaming laptop in the first place. The I/O is loaded on this laptop. So on the left-hand side, you get a Kensington lock RJ45 jack, a single USB 2.0 port, and audio jacks. Switching to the right, there are two USB 3.1 Gen 1 ports, a full-size SD card reader. Keep in mind it's UHS 1 versus UHS 2. And on the back, you get two mini display ports, HDMI 2.0, and a Type-C Gen 2 port and power in. One thing I should mention is that all of these USB ports are super tight. Basically, what I'm trying to say is if you're trying to plug something in, it's very difficult to plug them out. You have to force yourself out to remove external devices. So something to keep in mind. Maybe it's just our sample, but I thought it was worth mentioning. Moving on to the display, it's a 15.6-inch 1080p IPS-like display with a refresh rate of 144 Hz. The colors look amazing. It covers 95% sRGB, 73% Adobe RGB, and 74% DCI-P3. So you can get away with some content creation, but I wouldn't recommend this for serious colorists. It also only gets as bright as 330 nits, so outdoor visibility is certainly not the greatest. You see, here's the deal. The RP-15 is a gaming laptop in the first place, and you're getting that smooth gaming experience thanks to the higher refresh rate display, and it's great. And on top of that, you're getting good colors, so it's a good balance between the two. And I can't complain about that, especially for the price. Upgrading the RP-15 is pretty easy too. You have instant access to the two memory modules that are pre-installed. Maximum supported memory is 64 GB, which is nice. The NVMe SSDs are right over here. On our sample, there is a free M.2 slot with the mounting screw pre-installed, so adding another drive is straightforward. However, if you choose the dual drive RAID option, both of these slots will be populated. Another thing I need to mention is that unlike other gaming laptops that we reviewed, this one comes with a completely clean install of Windows without any bloatware. In fact, the only piece of software that they've pre-installed is the Eluktronics Control Center, which allows you to fiddle around with onboard features and some custom power plans. For example, the display color adjustments can be done either through presets or a more in-depth 3-axis interference, which is nice to see. Meanwhile, the lighting control for the RGB keyboard is super straightforward, but also really well done. And guys, I really wish if other manufacturers would take some notes. It might not look gamery, but this gets a job done really well. There's also a power mode section, and this is probably the most interesting. This is where the Eluktronics Beast mode lives. It essentially boosts CPU and GPU power to their maximum levels while also adding a more aggressive fan speed profile. You can turn the fans to a constant full speed setting here as well. Meanwhile, game mode is actually more of a balanced mode here, and they're still supposed to offer great performance without such high fan speeds. Finally, office mode is the most efficient and quiet setting. And the system monitor section, well, that's just a monitor and nothing more. In terms of battery life, don't expect miracles even in the office mode we tested, since this is a gaming notebook with a battery capacity about equal to many thin and light laptops. But it does get some pretty good results with just over 8 hours in our light load test. Meanwhile, bumping up to a heavier workload and times shoot downwards, but the RP-15 can still post respectable times. So with that out of the way, I guess it's time to talk about performance. And to do that, I've got to discuss how office, gaming, and beast modes on the RP-15 react over time during an all-core rendering workload. Starting out with temperatures, and they're really well managed in gaming and office modes with barely any movement above 75 degrees Celsius. Beast mode, on the other hand, does get hotter with a few spikes hitting around the 90-degree mark, but even then, most of the time, the RP-15 stays under 85. The odd thing here are the large swings from one area to the other in beast mode, but there is an explanation for that. As we look at power over time, it looks like all of the modes regularly hit higher power limits than AMD specifies. Office mode levels out to around 45 watts, while game mode seems to have a 55 watt limit, and beast mode, well, it's a beast with peaks that hit 75 watts. That's actually closer to desktop CPU power than anything I've seen from an AMD laptop, but based on temperatures, it seems like the cooling system doesn't have an issue handling it, so I can't complain. Clock speeds in beast mode were super consistent at around 4.1 GHz, which is actually the highest sustained frequency we've seen from any AMD laptop ever. The interesting thing here is the power spikes we saw in the last chart don't seem to cause any corresponding frequency increase. I mean, sure, the RP-15 is pushing more power, but it doesn't seem like the CPU takes advantage of it. The other two modes aren't as consistent, but both of them still offer speeds that are still better than anything we've tested so far. Now, you might be thinking the RP-15 achieves these crazy numbers by sacrificing noise, but that's not really the case. I mean, sure, beast mode is still pretty noisy, but it isn't the loudest gaming notebook we've come across either. Meanwhile, office and gaming modes turn things down a bit, but either way, this is obviously a device that puts performance before acoustics. Personally, I'd like to see office mode be a bit quieter than it is right now, but otherwise, if you want a quieter gaming experience, just buy a desktop or be prepared to make huge performance sacrifices. With so much focus being put on cooling performance, the RP-15's exterior keeps relatively cool, but I wouldn't want to keep it on my lap, that's for sure. It's also good to see most of the hot air being exhausted out the back and away from your hands. Without a massive difference in clock speeds, there really isn't all that much sacrifice moving between beast mode and either of the more efficient settings. Just remember, all of our testing is being done in the highest performance mode. And honestly guys, the results shouldn't come as a major surprise since this thing's operating at consistently higher speeds than any other AMD gaming laptop we reviewed up to now. That ends up leading to the RP-15 pretty much dominating in every single CPU-focused benchmark I could throw at it, especially at apps that was multi-core focused. Even something like WinRAR showed it leading the pack of other laptops with 4800Hs. In video rendering though, the additional clock speeds didn't really seem to make much of a difference, which is likely due to the application's limitations in Resolve and Premiere Pro. Gaming was another matter though, and the extra horsepower given to the 2060 by allowing it to operate up to 110 watts really does improve results, especially against other Ryzen gaming laptops that have typically been more constrained with GPU power. But I'm actually not too sure how much of this is due to more power going to the graphics card or whether the faster CPU is partially to blame. So to conclude, I'm genuinely impressed with Eluktronics and what they've been able to deliver with the RP-15. You see, this is all about maximizing performance, cooling, and giving users the most flexible I/O and then wrapping it into a chassis that doesn't feel super cheap. And of course, the price point. I think they've really nailed it in that department. And it also goes to show, in fact, it's really interesting that if a smaller company like Eluktronics can, push an AMD Ryzen chip to give you the best in terms of performance, and when you compare it to other brands like HP, ASUS, even MSI, they can possibly do it, but it feels like they don't wanna, and it kind of pisses me off because, they're charging a little bit of a premium on their AMD-based notebooks, and they do seem to miss the mark in a few areas, like for instance the trackpad, the display. Things like that are definitely, they're crucial elements, and Eluktronics, they seem to have nailed it out. So if you can find it, I would grab it, especially for the price. It's a fantastic option. So on that note, thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.